Hello, and welcome to the Mommy Escape Time podcast. I am Lauren, your host, and I have a 1-year-old son. I started this podcast for any mother who might feel alone in their journey through motherhood. Becoming a mom is hard no matter how you get there, and this podcast is about the mom stuff that comes up in our lives. Listen, enjoy, and connect with us on the Mommy Escape Time podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Mommy Escape Time podcast. I am Lauren, your host, and yes, it is just me. I am sorry I did not do a podcast last week, really, on the scheduled day. Let's just say that adjusting to Corona life has been a little bit of a challenge, and I don't really want to talk about that too much today because I feel like we all are getting it a lot in our lives, enough, and this is supposed to be the escape time, so that it's not supposed to be like that, but it has definitely been a challenge to work from home and have my son and completely change how I am a teacher. Which kind of brings me to our topic today is, what is it like to be a teacher? And I am not really going to talk about what it's like to be a teacher right now, but I will talk about my experience. This is my 11th year teaching, and I will talk about my experience as a whole. I'm not going to talk about a specific school. I'm not going to talk about anything. I don't want to say anything negative, but my focus is not going to be anything negative. I love my job and I love teaching students, so I don't want to put my job in jeopardy by just bashing everything about schools, because just so you know, in every job, there's stuff that you don't want to do and there's things that you wish could be different and they can't. So harping on that and talking about that is not going to be helpful. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of talk about my three main jobs that I've had in teaching, and we'll kind of go from there. So, what is it like to be a teacher? First of all, is you're very regulated. And in that case, when I first started, I started in an inner city school district, and I taught middle school, and I was the ESL teacher, which is English as a second language teacher. And I had and it was kind of an odd situation because there was a bilingual program and then there was the ESL program, which I almost saw as it kind of hurt some of the students. It polarized the ESL students into the bilingual section, into the non-bilingual section. So I wasn't like a huge fan of that aspect of it, because I think if they're all trying to learn English, the more they practiced it in English as opposed to their separate groups, that kind of made it better. And I've seen in other schools how, if they don't have a bilingual program, how much better it works out with students. And maybe in some situations it would, but this was like there weren't that many students total in the ESL population at this time. There were about 20, maybe 25 kids total in a school of 800. So not a ton of kids total. So having some of them in a bilingual program, I think just sometimes really separated the kids. But the kids are all wonderful and their parents are all amazing. I want you to know that ESL parents are like the dream parents of any teacher out there. They're often very supportive of you. They contact you to find out how their kids are doing. They come to events and they do their best to communicate with you. And those have been the best parents I've ever had. The fact that they make you part of their own community is something that's very special. That, I mean, it's not maybe a cultural thing in the United States anyways, but they always try to invite you and have you join anything that they are a part of. And I think that that's very special and something that I was very lucky to have for the years that I was there. So in that job, it was very different because I was assigned specific classrooms to work in sometimes. And then sometimes I would have the kids and we would work on specific guidelines or specific English work that we were working on specifically. So it doesn't always work because there's this thing in education called differentiation, which is every kid gets what they need in order to be successful in the classroom. And teachers do an excellent job about that. And that's part of my job of what I am doing. What I was doing was like making different tests, making different assignments for the kids, and trying to teach them those things. And even just trying to teach them some cultural things um, for them to understand. And I think, like, if we think about like a basic test, if you're thinking about a test for an English language student, you know, let's say it's a basic multiple choice test. They have to read the question and then they have to figure out from the multiple choice answers. And if you don't know, teachers' jobs in multiple choice answer questions is supposed to trick the kids using tricky vocabulary so that we know if the kids really know the answer or not, which is why I hate multiple choice answer tests to begin with. It's like impossible for ELL students to do that. They're called English language learners as students, just so you know. So I'll call them ELL students. And I hated multiple choice, and I don't know why, even at middle school, that was an option for tests. I think oral testing is probably the best for most students at that point. Even regular students, I think that them having maybe some seat work to do while the teacher called them up one by one and asked them questions about what was going on. I think that would get you a better response to know what the kids know and what the kids do not know. And I also think that would better help you to accomplish work. So typically I would take these students and I would make them separate tests. Often they were picture-based. They were things that we had done in classroom with the same wording. There was key vocabulary that they had to know, and that was what the focus was the vocabulary, maybe not as much the content, depending on their level of English language. So that's pretty much all I did. I did a lot of small group instruction, and I really enjoyed the kids. The kids were so good. The teachers I worked with, you have to understand when you're a teacher, there's always groups of teachers that you become really good friends with. And that was a school where I still talk to people that I work in that school. And that was, 8 years ago, where I worked in that school. And it was just wonderful. Because I was in such a large district, though, I did not really know anyone else from any other school. I never got to meet any other ESL teachers in my entire district in the 2 years that I was there, which at the time, because I didn't know any better, I didn't think that was weird. And now I look back on that and I'm like, how come I didn't know any other teacher in the entire district that was my same discipline? Like if you're a history teacher, there's other history teachers in your building. If you're a gym teacher, you might be the only gym teacher in your building. So it's kind of hard when you don't have like that group of people to go talk to. And in middle school in Connecticut, they have like teams. So like there's an English, a math, a science, and a history teacher all together on the same team. So there's like 100 kids and they switch between those 4 classes throughout the day, and then they go to their specials also throughout the day. So those 4 teachers are together, for meetings to talk about those 100 kids at least once or twice a week. So I kind of missed out on like that camaraderie when I first started teaching, but there were plenty of teachers that I worked with that, are good friends and continue to be good friends. And while I was doing that, while I was getting my ESL degree, which is called a TESOL certification, they really pushed for me to get my special ed degree. And I couldn't do it at the same time. There was a weird certification at the time where you could be a TESOL special ed teacher. So in English as a second language teacher that also was a special ed teacher. And I couldn't do it at the same time. So I just did my TESOL certification, got a job, and then started my special ed certification. So while I was at my first school district, I was also doing special education work also, which was such an odd combination. But there were a bunch of ELL students that at the time, that was the big thing, was that, ELL students, English language learner students, could also have need special educational services. And how are you going to figure out, is it ELL, is it special ed? And I will say it's very hard. It's very hard to manage, it's very hard to understand, and it's very hard to decide to go down that route. And I don't know if there's never an easy answer, and each case is different. And I don't always know that even if we say we identify a student as special education and they are an English language learner, if that even helps us any more, because we still have to work on their English and we're still trying to help them complete work. So if you hear beeping, it's my watch and I cannot get it to stop no matter what I do. So I think that it was just hard. So when I in my second year of teaching in my inner city school, it was a weird budget year. It wasn't 2008, but there was some budget crisis. So obviously, my job depended on numbers. So to keep my job as an ESL teacher, you need a minimum of 20 students. And I didn't know if the following year if there would be 20 students in that school, and it was kind of like a risk that I was not willing to take. So I actually just started looking for a job because I was so afraid that I wasn't going to have a job. Being an ESL teacher, you don't know what next year is going to bring. And as soon as those numbers go down, like, that's it. So it's a very unsteady job, and it's based on population where nothing else is. So you could have a job for 20 years there, and all of a sudden the population could change and you don't have a job anymore. So I didn't like the instability of that job. So I had my special ed certification, and I had like part-time been doing special ed and ESL at the same time. So I just started looking for a special ed job because, if you don't know, there's always a need for special ed teachers. And I also did not want to work in middle school. Everyone kept trying to convince me that I was a middle school teacher, and I always knew I was not a middle school teacher. I was a high school teacher, definitely. So I moved on to a high school, and it was a high school that I wanted to work at, and it was for a principal I really wanted to work for. Like, this principal was known in the state, and people wanted to work for him specifically. So he was well known, and people wanted to work for him. So I was like so excited. And when I started this job, I met like one of my best friends, and I just met with her. We actually met just before, because we knew that schools were going to be shutting down, and we actually met like 2 days beforehand just to see each other, because we're like, we don't know when we're going to get to see each other again. And I will say there was me, this other woman, and a third teacher who had been there forever. And the three of us were just like best friends. I mean, we were always together. We were always doing something. We are very good friends. And I think what I need to point out is that clearly I was more of a younger teacher, and these were much more experienced teachers. These are teachers that are on their way to retirement, and they are still my best friends. And that is one of the things that I like about teaching, is that your age doesn't really matter. You could be friends with anyone and lifelong friends with anyone, because there's just something that clicks in teaching, and your age does not matter. And I have to say, my first 2 years teaching special ed at this school was just amazing. And I co-taught in a very different situation than how I had co-taught in middle school. And I was actually like teaching lessons and preparing lessons and everything like that. And I had a co-teacher that I worked with, and we taught classes together, and it was amazing. I mean, we had such a good time. We just clicked. And to be perfectly honest, it was a very large high school that I worked at, and we had our class outside in a trailer. We were one of 4 classes that was outside in a trailer. And I think actually the first 2 years, it might have only been one other teacher and us. Not all 4 rooms were used. And I loved it. It was awesome. I miss working in that trailer every single day. It was the best to be out there. We had a we had a class of 30 kids, which, just so you know, not legal. Um, it was 30 kids. I don't even think maybe we had 27 desks, maybe. I can't even remember. And it was just ridiculous. We just had the most ridiculous time. And I just remember, I mean, our first year, my co-teacher and he and I just used to laugh. And we had such a routine down of what to do with the kids, and they thrived on that so much. And we had 2 different sections of US history. I can't even explain to you how ridiculously different they were, and how different the classes were. It was just out of control. I can't, one class had 16 and one class had 30. It was looking back on it now, I cannot believe I did not say anything, but that was my first year at that job. And it never happened again like that. I just want you to know it was a one-time thing. That first year that I was there was a shift in a lot of things. So some things just kind of got, they were just different. I had a 20-person self-contained English class. And I want you to know, so self-contained is classes just for special ed students. And it's supposed to be a small group setting so that you can intensely work on their skills, and in this case, reading and writing skills. Well, I had 20 kids. They were in 2 different grade levels, and it was first period every day. And I there were some kids that did not belong in that class that should have been in a higher level class, but you get dealt what you got dealt. So I had to work so hard. First of all, I had to teach English, and I want you to know I am not the English person. I can do history and I can do math. Those are the 2 things that I can do. And to teach this English class, I had a lot of stuff that I did. I did a grammar warm up every day, which a grammar warm up would be I would put a sentence on the board every day, and the kids would have a notebook and they'd have to copy down what it said on the board, because this was before smart boards or anything like that. There was no technology. I had a whiteboard. That was my technology. So I would write up, and there would be an error in the sentence, and they would have to figure it out. And every single day for 180 days, we started off doing that. Eventually, I did a worksheet where I gave them the 5 things every for the week, and they would just fill it out on the sheet, so they weren't handwriting out the sentence every day. But I didn't even think about that at the very beginning. And then we would read and answer questions. I first started off with 1 book for the whole class, and then they would answer questions. And then once I knew the kids and I knew better how to group them and help them, I put them in 3 different sections. So I had 3 different books going on at the same time, which now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I ever do that? That was so much work on me, so much work. First of all, because I had to read 3 separate books and come up with comprehension questions. And yes, there were comprehension questions kind of available to me, but kind of not, because the internet was not what it is like today, where you could just find things. You really had to come up with your own resources. And I had 2 pairs, and each of us would take a group, and we would fill out these questions. And I would have basic questions that were comprehension questions, and then I would have extended questions that they would have to write about. And then at the end of each book, we would do an essay, and then I would let them watch the book of whatever the movie of the book of whatever they were reading. And then we did another book together. And one of my biggest regrets is I did this Lance Armstrong book about, how he didn't cheat and all this other stuff. And 2 years later, it came out that, of course, he did cheat. And so that was a huge thing with my kids. But it was something that we bonded over. So that was how that year went. The second year was amazing also. our school also started going through a renovation. So everything was everywhere. At that time, my first year there, I was in an office that was like just a sectioned off part of the library. Like everyone else had like their own room, and the special ed department just had this sectioned off room in the library, which I actually did love. And we didn't even have our own computers. There were 3 computers, and the whole department had to share them. And I, like to this day, I'm still like shocked about that. I was like, we didn't all have our own computers. Like, how is that even possible? Like, had, we just, we just didn't even know how much we didn't know that we needed all this other stuff. So our school went through a renovation. So we had to do like, we had to pack and move like 4 times actually that year. And we were actually part of the design team because what ended up happening was that we were actually going to get an office, and we were all going to be in the same office. So that was one of the great things. And then so the construction happened over the summer, and then the following year we sort of had some construction, but not really. And then we also started with some new administration overall through the district, and that's probably when I started to not like my job as much. If you don't know, in education, whoever is in charge can greatly change how your job goes. And this was one where day one I knew that I needed to get out. And I ended up staying for 2 years, and I regretted staying that second year. I wish I had gotten out earlier because I was just so unbelievably unhappy. And I just so regret staying that second year and I stayed because of my friends that were there. I wanted to be with my friends. I loved being with my friends, and to leave them was so hard. That was the hardest part. But I at that time I had also met my husband. He wasn't my husband at the time, but we met, and I knew that, you know, we lived like an hour apart from each other, and my husband's job was not flexible like it is now. So I knew that I was the one that was going to have to move and find a new job, because there was no way that I used to work in Fairfield County, and staying in Fairfield County would have been nice, but not practical. It's just so expensive there. It's like its own country. I don't know how to explain it. It's not part of New York City, but it's not part of Connecticut either. And it's just so expensive, and it's just very different. I don't know how else to explain it unless you've lived there. So I knew that was not in the cards for us. So I had to start looking for another job. And I actually found a job where I teach now, 2 weeks before I was getting married to my husband. And Taryn, who's been on the podcast before, she was going to be my co-teacher, and she actually texted me on my wedding day morning and said, "Hey, I hear you're going to be co-teaching. Do you want to get together next week and talk?" And I remember texting her back and being like, "I'm getting married today, and I'll be gone for 2 weeks, so I won't be able to do that." And she like wrote back, she's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I can't wait to hear all about your wedding." So I knew that I was going to be co-teaching with Taryn when I started this new job, and we worked great together. Again, I co-taught 2 classes with her. I did a class on my own, and then I did support classes. So I guess what I'll do is, this is me talking about my teaching career, and maybe the next episode I'll talk to you like daily life, what it was like to be a teacher, because I think that's more what people wanted to hear. But for teaching, I mean, it's just, I've been at this school now. I think this is my 5th year at this school. And again, you make new friends wherever you go, and you keep your old friends, and you see them, and you kind of see that, some things are just the same at every single school, which is kind of what you expect. I mean, it depends on your leadership, but pretty much everything is the same. Going from school to school, it's just different names. That's it. I wish I could say it's different, but I mean, all kids need help. So it's just the way it happens. So, um, yeah. So I guess what I'll do is this will be a two-part. This is kind of like my teaching history in this episode. And then next episode, I'll kind of talk about daily life as a teacher and what that's like, and kind of go through with you what a day is like. And I'll even slip in what it's like to have a day in the life when you're teaching from home. So, all right. I hope everyone stays safe. I hope this brought a little brightness to your day. It really helped me actually to do a little recap of my teaching career, because right now, teaching from home will just be a blip on the radar in my overall teaching. So, anyways, stay safe, stay at home, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.